Welcome to The Voice of Retail. I'm your host, Michael LeBlanc. This podcast is brought to you in conjunction with Retail Council of Canada. Recorded live at RCC's Retail West Conference in Vancouver, Christine Day, former CEO of Lululemon and international executive at Starbucks, joins me on the main stage to talk about her latest and perhaps most important venture, the House of LR&C. We talk about the apparel industry's social impact and the retail sector's changing structure. We end with a fun, rapid-fire round of questions to glean Christine's perspective on the hottest topics in retail. Let's listen in now. I am now honored, speaking of wrap up, to do a deep dive on retail strategy with a leader who knows about growth and experience. Christine Day, co-founder, CEO of the House of LR&C, background leading a couple of global brands you may or may not have heard of. Starbucks, anyone? And Lululemon. Christine, please join me on the stage.
I think I'm on. Yep.
I think you're on, yeah? I think you're on for sure. All right, listen, let's jump right in. Let's talk about the House of LR&C. So let's talk about the origin story, what it is, scope and scale, what makes it remarkable. The other brands would be very familiar, but perhaps a little less so for the House of LR&C.
Okay, so it stands for the House of Love, Respect, and Care. We formed about 3 years ago now. So it's a fashion apparel house, but everything we do is based on sustainable fabrics, going back to fabrics first. The fashion industry, as you probably know, is the third dirtiest industry in the world. And so there's lots of room for improvement. So taking, an experienced team, everything that we know about great fabrics, about great factories that raise really the level of compliance in this world of ESG and sustainability, and building what we call building the type of company the future needs now. So we formed as a public benefit corp in the States, which means a triple bottom line. And we designed into the UN sustainability goals, the textile exchanges, top box, because they've evaluated every fabric, their top box fabrics, and really started designing clothing with fashion first, because if we don't give the consumer what they want, which is fashion, we really can't change the industry. And what you've seen is the rise of brands, which I have deep respect for, like Patagonia and Everlane, et cetera, but they really aren't in the fashion business. So until we take the fashion all the way to the consumer with sustainability, making it the effortless choice, we can't change behavior. So also believe in being in an omni-channel. So in 3 years, we've built 3 brands in 3 channels hit those sustainability objectives.
And did you talk about who your partners were in this little venture?
No, my partners are the singer Sierra and her husband Russell Wilson.
Fantastic. Now, I want to get to how you got connected with them and why you chose this specifically, because you could have done a lot of different things. Before that, you threw out a couple of quick terms. Would you say top box?
Yeah, top box.
What does that mean?
So everything we do is the Textile Exchange has rated every fabric. And so they have them graded into better, best, good, et cetera. So 70% of everything we make comes from those top box scores. And then if we make anything from the good category, we kind of call it vintage now. So it has to be a statement piece that has to last at least 10 years. And so it's the future thrift shop item that you would have.
Interesting. All right. So let's talk about why you jumped in with this. I mean, you've got a background that many would envy. It's a remarkable background of experience. You probably could have had a lot of choice to do a lot of different things.
I could be making millions of dollars a year being a CEO of a big company.
Yes. You could be on a yacht outside in the harbor.
That's true.
If you wanted.
I could do that too.
What compelled you to get into this line of work? I mean, you came from, you got Lululemon in the background, so clearly you were connected to the connected fashion. But talk a little bit about that, and then talk about how it came together with Sierra and Russell.
So I also created a food as medicine company in between doing Lululemon and this. And I met Russell through that because his dad died of diabetes. And so the company that I created does food for diabetes, hypertension, et cetera, sold through, qualified now as food as medicine, sold through insurance companies in the state for Medicare, Medicaid. He wanted to be an ambassador for that. He came to me and through his agent. And so we became friendly through that. And then he had run his brand, Goodman brand, with 3 ex-Nordstrom's employees, but it was only sold to Nordstrom's, and it wasn't much of a brand, and it didn't have any sustainability. So he was about to invest more money in it, and he said, off the side of your desk, will you help me with this? And I said, yes. The next thing I knew, I was creating a whole fashion house and 3 brands and changing the fashion industry. So.
Well, it's interesting. Let's talk about that. I mean, I've worked with celebrities in terms of designing, and some, generally attach their name to it. Others really get involved. So, you're talking about, an ex-pro NFL football player and an entertainer. So talk about your relation with them, what role they play. I see them on the site. I mean, they're very inspiring, talented individuals. What role do they play in the business?
They're both on the board, but we only talk to Russell really between March and July, and then he's gone, right? Because he's in football, and so it doesn't look good if he's doing anything besides football. But Sierra's very involved as creative director, so all those photo shoots and things that you see, she actually schedules, creates all the themes behind it, reviews the line with us. But she trusts us as the experts in the space. Right. What's more commercial? We're not dressing Sierra the singer. We certainly don't do her Grammy outfits and things like that. But it's the everyday aspect of more capturing her fashion essence in what we do.
Talk about the creative process that drives that. I mean, Sierra as an entertainer would be super creative just as part of her DNA. And Russell in the same way would be creative in a different way. Talk about the creative process.
They definitely have points of view. So for instance, in this last season or collection that we just did for Sierra, she was inspired as a young girl by the movie stars of the 70s, which was a time particularly when there were a lot of great Black African-American women, so like Pam Grier. So we chose a 70s theme for that. Then she wanted to, for the spring collection, go back to kind of her roots of when she started, which was the 90s. And so, we take kind of her bigger ideas, but then put them into a cohesive line that's scalable, repeatable. So, you're just changing the details on a suit, for instance, to hit that theme, but you're still doing a suit, right, which is a commercial product.
Right. So interesting. All right, let's jump ahead. Let's change tacks a little bit. Let's talk about the state of retail, the state of business. Listen, coming out of the COVID era, the quasi-post-COVID era, whatever we're in today, there was some categories of apparel that did actually pretty well, others that, that just demand collapsed. Coming back now as people start to travel. As you think about current state, running as being an operator, how are you feeling about your business, about holiday, about demands from consumers? I see at the higher end demand continues. I mean, there's several companies that continue to do well. Others are doing well year over year because it was not a great year. But how are you feeling about holiday and the prospects for the industry and the business?
We're growing at 150%, right? So the consumer is still there. So if you look at the consumer who is 150 income and above, they're responsible for 40% of purchases. 75 and above, you get to 80. That consumer so far has been relatively unaffected and is still very healthy. So if your product is targeted to that consumer, brands have typically still been doing very well.
What's your average price point? Do you have such a thing?
We are as low as $88 on some of the pieces and as high as $600 on some of the faux fur coats.
The statement piece,
the statement pieces. And so everything kind of in between. We'd be, comparable on the women's brand and the men's brand to like Vince, Theory, Rag & Bone type pricing for that. Okay. And then our brand that targets the Gen Z, which is called Human Nation, that's like $78 for a hoodie. And so very comparable with like a Nike, price point.
Yeah. So we saw some data from Leger around consumers that were starting to shop earlier for holidays.
Yes.
And I think the logic in their minds I've heard articulated is I want to shop now before prices go up later. And then there's the countervailing, which is I think I'm going to wait because I hear there's lots of inventory at different retailers. Where do you sit on thinking about consumers taking all that in?
Well, I think there's a couple different trends going on there. I'm not actually worried about inventory levels in most retail. You've got to remember in the global supply chain meltdown, a lot of people's Christmas product came in February or March, so it missed the season. They packed and held that. That's why inventory's been high all year.
Right.
And so that's what they're selling now. So they have the pack and hold cost, but at last year's prices, they bought light. So I think you're going to see a big correction back from a lot of retailers at the end of Q4 with inventory coming down pretty substantially. The second thing that you saw happening, particularly if you're going across North America, was there was a big concern about the West Coast port strike because all the contracts are up at once. Now, it didn't happen, but retailers brought some inventory in early for that. So I don't think it's just inventory and discount game. At the lower end of the market, where there's an abundance of kind of the cheap product in the discount, because remember during the pandemic, a lot of people like the TJ Maxx's, et cetera, bought up a ton of really great inventory from that. There was 22 weeks of excess inventory. So that's now still playing out, and it's in-season inventory that they're putting out now, and normally they're counter-seasonal. So there's a big stock of inventory there. So it gets a little harder to compete at that discount level of the marketplace today. And so I think that's where you're going to see the most discounts. But that's good news for the consumer today who's feeling the price pressure from maybe oil, housing, food. It's still hard to get, and supply chain's still somewhat broken for technology, for cars, microchips, foam, still, you can't get a couch. But your basic housewares, apparel, et cetera, what we are seeing is trends for back-to-work clothing, entertainment clothing, and so dressing up and personal expression. So I think a lot of the brands that have focused and stayed on quality, have stayed on design and fashion, are going to do really well this holiday season. And people have been spending their money on travel, getting back out, seeing family experiences. So refreshing the wardrobe, I think, will actually be a good trend for holiday, and maybe not as much because everybody, redid their kitchens during the pandemic. So I think we still will be a little long on housewares for a while.
Yeah, it's an interesting dynamic, right? I mean, if you think a lot of those goods, they were really bought forward a year and a half. As one retailer said to me, people don't need another big screen TV. They bought 3 of them or whatever during the event. How are you feeling on a scale of 1 to 5 about your supply chain? 1 being comfortable, everything is fine. 5 being, it's a trash bit fire. Where do you sit on a 1 to 5 scale?
Well, we just are finishing up a NetSuite implementation, so you couldn't get product in a while ago, right? So now getting product out and invoicing it are my current challenges, but that's a little self-inflicted with a NetSuite implementation. I feel very good about it. I never built a supply chain that was overly dependent on Vietnam, Indonesia, et cetera, because what you see in the industry today is where the exciting innovation on B Corp factories is happening is actually in little markets, some segments of Vietnam, but more interestingly to me in Peru, Guatemala, because I think this ties to how the capital markets work with us as retailers. What you're seeing is kind of a breakdown of globalization and a rise of regionalization. And in order to reduce your carbon footprint, you need to produce regionally. So what's happening now is capital is being reinvested in factories in North America. So an example would be Saytex, a jeans factory that produces jeans in the LA region with only 8 gallons of water. The dye sludge that comes out gets made into bricks that get sold into low-income housing. So that kind of capital reinvestment in the North American markets is long overdue. The capital markets have not supported asset investment. You see that in people costs. We haven't been investing in our people at the expense of giving bigger dividends and shareholder returns. So I think what you're going to see is a redo of that value chain, which is why you're seeing a little rise of unionization right now. And what's the interesting thing, if you think about it, in public markets, your biggest shareholder is often pension funds. Whose pension funds? Their unions. For the first time, you're actually seeing the unions using that power of then the investor base is telling the companies, don't fight the unions, you need to pay your people more. Why are they vested in that? Because if less people are unionized, pay is less, that's less money into them, less money to manage and to invest. So there's this very interesting cycle that's happening right now between the breakdown of globalization and really the lack of investment in capital, meaning both people and assets. And so that's going to have to change in this world that we're seeing as we move into regionalization. So the good news is us as leaders who've had to live in the world of managing people and assets and capital and lots of it know how to do that. But the capital markets are going to have to adjust to resorting that value chain of where investment goes.
Retailers have told me that the talent challenges have supplemented supply chain challenges around the boardroom table as the top issue. Listen, talent acquiring and keeping was never a non-issue. It was probably a top issue pre-COVID, but it was supplemented for a while. in different ways. Where do you sit with and how you view it? How do you recruit? I mean, you're a unique brand with a purpose, so right away there's a subset of people who are going to be attracted to work in your environment. But how are you?
And we pay well, right? I mean, so we're starting our sales associates out at $22 an hour, and then we pay for it's more important in the States than here, but their benefits, and we pay 80% of the individual, 50% of the family, and guarantee them the 30 hours. Right. So really that investment.
Say that last part again. You guarantee them a number of, because that's always the hook that. Yep. The shoe that falls is we pay you well, but the hours are inconsistent. You guarantee them.
If they want that on the schedule, we let them, schedule and basically bid into that. So I think it's a really important thing that we have to realize that people need stable lives, stable incomes, and that's our responsibility when we hire into this space. What I am seeing, which is I think really interesting as a people leader, we're seeing young people come into the market that even, they maybe started university and 2 years still from home, not working or being not working because there weren't the jobs, because the restaurant industry, the hotel industry, everything shut down. And then not also being live in class. So what I'm seeing with a lot of the young workers is a real setback in social skills and almost being shocked by the work of work. And it's like they think it's hard or an injustice, and I'm kind of like, you served 30 people today. I don't think that's hard, but I've always been a people leader, and so I'm it's really interesting to watch this and see the reacclimation is what I would call it, and having to be sensitive to that as a leader, bring everybody along, really teach a lot more work skills and customer service skills than I really had anticipated in the young people in the market. And I think as leaders, we have to be sensitive to the trauma that these young people, or there's certain emotional, social behaviors that they're catching up quickly, but it's a shock to the system, and that's been very interesting for me to deal with.
Yeah, so interesting. We spent a fair bit of the day talking about how not to be channel specific, but I'm going to ask you a channel specific question. E-commerce, when I chat with retailers, many of them are surprised by the quick deceleration of e-commerce, at least year over year. As an industry, and how have you been experiencing e-commerce versus store sales and that kind of dynamic?
We haven't seen any slowdown in our DTC. It's still growing. We just started the retail and pop-up stores, and what I would say is it's exciting to see malls full of people again, or streets full of people, people eager to be out shopping, the personal experience. Retail is always still a social experience. And that's, I think the more social you make it online, the more that's going to attract customers. But I think stores will be smaller going forward. You're not going to see as many of these big flagship, big stores because of an omni-channel. And you're going to see more integration of wholesale, retail, and DTC, and a lot of small brands rising.
You talked about capital structures, and so not to dwell on that, but advice to the small, mid, and large that are in the room. How are you feeling about capital structure, investments in business? How are you feeling and approaching that?
So I'm always talking to different funds, and it was really interesting. So I won't mention names, but two of the ones I talked to this last week, one did 9 deals last year, and some of them significantly here in Canada. They did 1 deal. The other one did 12 deals last year and did 0 this year. So pretty much everybody's saying capital's going to sit on the market until they see what happens with inventory, with pricers, where the consumer is, till about Q2 of next year.
So it's kind of like a measure twice, cut, measure 10 times, cut once. It used to be a little more aggressive than that, right?
Well, I think a lot more aggressive, because I think the other thing that you're seeing is there was a lot of investment in kind of mono brand DTC, so Harry's Razors type models. And
I call them the wobbly unicorns.
So a lot of burnt people in the capital markets around investing in that. So they're waiting to see how the business model evolves right now, because we're in one of the greatest times of transition in retail. And, and I want to just give a big shout out to everybody who's sitting in this room. If you survived a pandemic, a global supply chain meltdown, and now a pending recession, bless you. You are great leaders.
Congratulate yourself. You're here. How do you feel about the industry in terms of resilience? As you said, we just went through a tremendous time. If you and I were sitting here in just before pre-pandemic, we'd be talking about the retail apocalypse, right? Which was a media myth or a canard, but really the transformation is real. The transformation is already happening.
Yeah.
How are you feeling about that? The industry, better off through the fire and what we survived in COVID.
I think it's kind of similar to, the 2008, 2009. It cleans out a lot of probably the less solid business models and maybe ones that were more purpose but less profit. I think it's coming to terms with the kind of ESG model and sustainability, but it has to be practical. You can't do good unless you're making money. So, I think it's bringing those forces together right now. And what gives me great hope is so many of the young retail leaders that I had dinner with some last night or earlier today, all these young entrepreneurs who come into it with ESG already in their mindset, right? It's not a department. It's not a filter of their business. It's a way of being. It's how they look at the world. The businesses that they're starting, the innovation they're bringing, the ability to leverage technology. I've spent a lot of time in China, and people don't hear, but they are really far ahead, as you saw, and if you were here in the earlier presentation, in using technology and innovation because they weren't saddled with the baggage of the past. So they're kind of inventing into the future.
Yeah.
We need to take that same big leap forward here. And I see a lot of the young, smaller businesses become medium-sized businesses, which become, consumed by maybe the big businesses to transform them and change. And I think we're in a big change cycle where the small companies will force the big ones to change, not unlike we saw in the food industry 20 years ago, right? So you would really only buy organic food at your Whole Foods. And now the largest producer and seller of whole food is Walmart, right? So it takes small companies creating to mid companies, changing the supply chain and transforming the big companies. So getting back to, I never really answered your question, why did I come back and do this? It's because I know it's small and medium-sized companies that change the supply chain, that change the big companies. So yes, I could have gone to a big company to do that, but the disruption to the capital forces, that'd be like Ron Johnson going into JCPenney and changing it, right? It didn't work. So I think you have to start where the point of the arrow is going to make the biggest difference.
For the time we have remaining, I wanted to do a rapid fire kind of questions. Now, typically in these things, we get together for a pre-meeting and we talk about generally the roadmap. So you don't know what I'm going to ask you.
No.
So these are going to kind of be, okay, what do you think about? What do you think about? And you mentioned Ron Johnson, his latest venture just wrapped up, did not wrap up successfully. How are you feeling about changes of delivery in general? So the fast, the GoPuffs of the world, the same-day delivery, the 1-hour delivery, how important is that to retail, or is it a niche?
I think it will have a role, but I don't think it will become the big dominant player.
Okay. Retail media networks. Every conference I go to, more in the U.S., and more in grocery, is talking about these retail media networks where you can really the brands are taking money away from the social platforms and putting them into retailers who have the audiences. How are you feeling about retail media networks?
I don't like them, and the reason I would say that is as a brand who sells to grocery stores, because I've done that in my career, if you use social media, you can control your spend up and down based on your cash flow. When you sign up with the grocery store for those, you've made a commitment and it's taken right off your cash flow and your billing cycle right there, and it's often now a part of your margin conversations with the grocer. And it's just one more compression on that food manufacturer at a time when prices are rising, et cetera. And it's no longer optional versus if I'm spending into paid social media channels, which we're getting more expensive because it's kind of an oligopoly. So I think it's putting a squeeze, and I've never seen them be very successful. The only one that I've seen be successful is actually somebody like Nordstrom's, where 67% of their loyal customers spend the most with them. So when you tap into that customer, they're successful. Unless a grocery store could convince me they had that kind of customer, and I've tried them, I've spent money into those, I've never seen the return at the level that I would need to see for the money I'm being asked to spend.
How are you feeling about the metaverse?
That's a tough one. I'm probably too old, I think. I think when it's, I do see the kids using that as a status. I think the group that I think's done the most with it is one of the American retailers, and Brianne Olsen.
A&E has done a lot.
Yeah, A&E's done a lot with it. PacSun, Brianne Olsen, who runs that. She's probably the leader in the space, and a doctor that I'm watching what she's doing for carefully. I think that's something I have to watch and learn as opposed to be an expert on right now.
We heard Kasia talking about live stream retail. It was supposed to be the big thing in North America. It really hasn't taken off quite yet. How are you feeling about live stream retail?
I like it, and I think it will be good for the business, and I think we're just not at the stage of engaging customers. I mean, like, you think about, like, we think TikTok's a big deal. Honestly, like, you know, when I was in Starbucks in Korea, we were tapping on phones paying for coffee drinks in 2001. So, you know, their use of QR codes and everything else is so much more sophisticated than ours.
You have $1 left, $1 left in your marketing budget. Where would you spend it?
On Sierra.
Yeah, right.
She's got 81 million followers. I think I'm good.
Okay, not everybody has that, but okay. You're hiring your next social media team person. Do you go for a performance marketer or a storyteller?
Well, I think it would depend on if I was in China or here.
Oh, okay. That's interesting. You're hiring your next director of marketing. Would they be based? Where are you based? Where's the headquarters? Do you have a headquarters? Are you virtual?
We have some team here in Vancouver and some team in Seattle, and my head of marketing is in Vancouver.
So would you hire anybody anywhere? Culturally, how are you feeling about that?
You know, I do believe in, you know, I've run global teams. I ran 10 countries in Asia out of Hong Kong, right? So I had teams everywhere that I had to do virtually. So I do believe in that model, and I don't think everybody needs to be together, but I also think that you have to have a very tight executive team when you're forming a company.
Sure.
So I do think proximity matters a little bit more then.
Okay. Buy now, pay later.
Do it.
Okay. Cryptocurrency. Not sure about
I mean,
that.
I think all the mobile technologies and pay and everything, you know, you've got 11 of those. I do think there's a little bit of room for cryptocurrency, but I'm not sold on the cryptocurrency model and the server time and impact to the environment. So I have some other hurdles to get over on that one.
In your stores, eliminating cash.
It's done. We don't take cash.
You don't take cash. Not worried about that. You don't take cash.
Don't
done
take
and
cash.
done. Not looking back.
Not looking back.
This has been a fantastic conversation. Thank you for being such a good sport and taking questions that
thank you.
Christine. Thanks so much, everyone. Christine Day.
Thanks for tuning into this special episode of The Voice of Retail. If you haven't already, be sure and click and subscribe on your favorite podcast platform so new episodes will land automatically twice a week. And check out my other retail industry media properties, the Remarkable Retail Podcast, Conversations with Commerce Next podcast, and the Food Professor podcast with Dr. Sylvain Charlebois. Last but not least, if you're into barbecue, check out my all-new YouTube barbecue show, Last Request Barbecue, with new episodes each and every week. I'm your host, Michael LeBlanc, president of Emmy LeBlanc Company and Maven Media. And if you're looking for more content or want to chat, follow me on LinkedIn or visit my website at emmyleblanc.co. Have a safe week, everyone.